We interrupt standard broadcasts with an urgent, unprecedented report from behind the heavy iron gates of Buckingham Palace. Breaking disclosures are arriving in real time, confirming a seismic, covert power shift at the very apex of the British monarchy. The supreme, ancient authority of the sovereign has been invoked not to defend the royal inner circle, but to purge it from within. Within the last hour, His Majesty King Charles III has initiated a formal, irreversible process to strip the style, titles, and governing authority from the woman who sat beside him on the throne. The document that dismantled an empire of personal devotion was precisely 4 pages long, bound in heavy cream parchment. But the moment the king's fountain pen carved his name beneath its final paragraph, the balance of absolute power inside the House of Windsor was shattered forever. In the claustrophobic quiet of the private Buckingham Palace study, no courtiers, press secretaries, or household advisors were permitted to witness the execution of the royal decree. The heavy mahogany doors had been bolted from within, transforming the royal sanctuary into a court of silent, unyielding judgment. Standing in the shadows beside her brother, Princess Anne watched with cold, unwavering resolution, her face an unreadable mask of iron discipline that revealed no triumph, only a grim, unforgiving determination to protect the lineage. Across the vast estate, Queen Camilla remained entirely oblivious, her mind occupied by routine royal schedules, completely unaware that the title defining her entire public identity had just been systematically erased by the 2 people she believed would never unite against her. Charles kept his trembling hand near the silver pen, his breathing shallow, his face lined with profound emotional exhaustion. Before him lay a sealed constitutional order, a legal execution of rank that outlined, in agonizing detail, the total stripping of Camilla's authority, access, and royal privilege. The legal papers had taken weeks of secretive preparation by senior palace lawyers, yet the terrifying weight of the final act belonged to him alone. Anne watched her brother fixate on his wife's name as though every curve of dark ink summoned a decades-old memory of public scandal, intense hostility, and private promises. He remembered fighting the world, the press, and the ghost of the past to place her beside him. Now, bound by an oath higher than love, he was authorizing the crown to separate her from the identity he had fought so fiercely to secure. Princess Anne did not command him to continue. She simply placed one steady hand beside the document, her voice cutting through the suffocating silence like steel, reminding him that protecting the crown requires a heartbreak no royal family can escape. The closed door changed everything. Charles signed the decree, and Anne added her own signature beside his, creating an unyielding dynastic front, strong enough to crush any claim that the decision stemmed from temporary anger or spite. The formal decree was absolute. It revoked Camilla's designation as queen consort, exiled her from the monarchy's senior governing circle, and placed a permanent constitutional bar, preventing her from ever attending future accession councils or receiving confidential succession briefings regarding Prince William's future reign. Charles summoned a senior palace secretary into the dimly lit room and gave one cold, quiet instruction. Camilla must hear the news before the public does. The aide accepted the sealed envelope silently, but the king noticed the subtle, trembling pause in his breath before the secretary turned to leave. Across the palace, the queen consort was ending a telephone call regarding an upcoming state event. She believed the arrangements were still hers to command, oblivious to the fact that her title, access, and authority had already been stripped away. Moments later, the fateful knock echoed through her private sitting room. Accepting the heavy envelope, Camilla dismissed the secretary and broke the crimson wax seal alone. She read the first paragraph twice before slowly lowering herself into a velvet chair. The constitutional decree stated in unmistakable language that her title and senior privileges had been withdrawn with immediate effect. Then she saw Anne's signature written beside Charles's approval, a discovery that cut deeper than the decree itself, proving this was no passing argument, but an irreversible verdict. Folded behind the legal pages lay a short, handwritten note from Charles. He offered no apology and asked for no forgiveness, explaining only that the crown required a boundary he could no longer ignore. Pressing the note flat with shaking fingers, Camilla's eyes reached a final clause referencing a recent ceremony at Windsor Castle. In that terrifying instant, she understood the true cause of her downfall, a fatal breach of trust committed weeks ago during a proceeding that had turned Anne's quiet concern into lethal resolve. The catastrophic collapse of Camilla's royal status did not begin with raised voices, public scandal, or open political rebellion. It was born weeks earlier within the suffocating grand atmosphere of Windsor Castle, a sacred space where centuries of bloodline precedent dictate every movement, every breath, and every assignment of physical power. It was supposed to be a tightly controlled, highly classified gathering designed to formally confirm Prince William's expanding constitutional role as the ultimate heir to the realm. Every chair had been measured to the exact millimeter, every presentation order meticulously vetted by Princess Anne herself to ensure a seamless, dignified transition of responsibility without making the reigning monarch appear diminished. But in the final, fragile minutes before the high-ranking officials entered the Grand Hall, Queen Camilla executed a silent, calculated maneuver that exposed a toxic struggle for authority within the sovereign's inner court. Approaching a senior equerry with cold, quiet command, Camilla issued a clandestine order that shattered decades of unwritten royal law. She demanded that Prince William's official portfolio be removed from the primary position at the central conference table. In its place, she positioned her own ceremonial portfolio, physically placing herself between King Charles and his son, effectively marginalizing the future King of England in full view of the realm's highest constitutional officers. When Prince William entered the room, his eyes instantly caught the altered arrangement. He did not issue a public protest, nor did he break the rigid, icy decorum required of his bloodline, but his tightened jaw, pale knuckles, and rigid posture betrayed a devastating humiliation. He had not merely been displaced at a table, he had watched his stepmother attempt to claim authority over a moment explicitly designed to confirm his future reign. From the corner of the stateroom, Princess Anne observed the entire exchange with razor-sharp precision. What horrified the Princess Royal most was not merely Camilla's brazen overreach, but Charles's absolute paralyzed silence. The king had seen the alteration and chose conflict avoidance over constitutional duty. The moment the ceremony concluded, Anne pursued her brother into a narrow stone corridor far from the ears of the household staff. Cornering the monarch, her eyes burning with fierce protective instinct, she demanded to know why he had allowed an approved arrangement to be overturned. When Charles nervously loosened his cuff and avoided her gaze, murmuring that he merely wished to prevent public embarrassment, Anne's response fell like iron. His silence had signaled to the entire court that the queen consort could rewrite royal authority whenever his resolve faltered. That evening, the suspicion deepened into an existential crisis for the crown. Through a documented briefing delivered by a senior household officer, Anne uncovered a paper trail of staggering ambition. Camilla's private office had quietly drafted and circulated internal government memos framing her as the monarchy's sole continuity authority, a fabricated title suggesting she held power to direct state affairs during any future transition. Worse still, a second file revealed that Camilla's team had twice attempted to gain unauthorized access to classified succession dossiers governing William's eventual ascension. The palace's top legal advisors had rejected the first request privately, but Camilla's office had reworded the demand, attempting to bypass legal safeguards to gain control over the heir's future. The following morning, Anne brought both damning files directly into Charles's study at Clarence House. She placed them before the king and demanded that Camilla be summoned without advisors, aides, or excuses. The three of them gathered in the drawing room, a space chosen because it belonged to private memory rather than cold ceremony. Charles sat at one end, haunted and pale, while Camilla sat opposite him. Anne remained between them, laying the altered Windsor briefing and the unauthorized succession requests on the polished table. For seconds that stretched like an eternity, nobody spoke. Then, Princess Anne asked one question with devastating calm. Who had given Camilla the authority to place herself inside the line of succession? Camilla lifted her chin, attempting to mask her panic behind a facade of fierce devotion, claiming she had acted solely to shield Charles from being overshadowed by his son's rising influence. She argued that the Windsor ceremony risked making the monarch appear weak, while William's authority grew before senior household figures. But Charles, staring at the woman he had loved for a lifetime, saw through the tragic delusion. He asked why she had never consulted him, a question that struck harder than anger because it exposed the true wound. She had not merely sought influence, she had assumed his approval before he had given it. When Camilla tried to push the documents back across the table, Anne stopped them with two firm fingers. Charles slowly removed his glasses and set them down, the crushing silence confirming that the boundary had been crossed forever. The atmosphere inside the drawing room of Clarence House grew dangerously thin, heavy with the suffocating weight of an impending dynastic collapse. Outside, night had fallen over London, casting long, dark shadows across the grand palace windows. But inside, the harsh chandelier light illuminated three figures trapped in an irreversible standoff. The altered Windsor briefing and the unauthorized requests for Prince William's succession files lay open upon the polished mahogany table, like damning evidence in a high treason trial. The polite fictions of royal decorum had completely dissolved, leaving behind the raw, unvarnished collision of ambition, loyalty, and sovereign duty. This was no longer a quiet disagreement over court etiquette. It was an existential, behind-the-scenes struggle for the supreme, absolute authority of the British throne. Camilla leaned forward, her fingers trembling slightly against the dark wood, though her eyes blazed with a desperate defensive defiance. She looked directly at the king, bypassing Princess Anne entirely, attempting to appeal to the deep personal bond that had survived decades of public exile, societal hostility, and tabloid warfare. She argued that her covert maneuvers were not born of treasonous malice or personal greed, but of absolute, fierce protection for a monarch she believed was being systematically undermined.
"I acted to save your reign, Charles," she insisted, her voice tight with emotional strain and suppressed panic. "I watched as your son's court began to expand, as advisors quietly shifted the center of gravity away from you and toward the heir. I saw you being treated as a temporary custodian rather than the ruling sovereign. Everything I altered at Windsor, every file my office requested, was designed to construct a wall of authority around you, so that no decision regarding the crown's future could be made without passing directly through your hands." For several agonizing seconds, the king did not answer. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that had measured the reign of a dozen monarchs before them. Charles stared at his wife, the woman for whom he had endured national hatred, fractured his family, and risked the stability of the throne itself. But where Camilla desperately expected to find hesitation, soft understanding, or protective forgiveness, she met only a profound, devastating sorrow. The king slowly shook his head, his hands folded tightly in his lap to hide their involuntary tremor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the crushing, majestic weight of the state. "You did not seek to protect me, Camilla," Charles said, every word dripping with unbearable heartbreak. "You sought to construct a competing center of power inside my own house. Protecting me could never mean weakening my son. Protecting the monarchy cannot mean dividing it into warring, bitter factions. You did not ask for my permission because you knew I would have forbidden it. You assumed my consent, and in doing so, you betrayed the trust upon which this entire institution rests." It was at that exact instant that Princess Anne stepped into the center of the room, her presence commanding absolute, terrifying authority. From her leather portfolio, she produced a second, pristine document, a formal legal declaration that froze the blood in Camilla's veins. Anne placed her own ultimatum on the desk beside the altered briefs. Through a recorded, classified family consultation prepared for the royal archives, the Princess Royal revealed that she had already drafted her own immediate resignation from all senior royal duties. She looked her brother directly in the eyes, her gaze locked onto the king with unflinching discipline, and delivered a verdict that left no room for retreat. "If affection is permitted to override constitutional law, then the House of Windsor is already compromised," Anne declared with icy precision. "I will not stand beside a sovereign who allows his household to be governed by personal emotion rather than dynastic rule. If she remains inside the line of authority, my service to this crown ends tonight. You must choose, Charles. You choose the crown, or you choose the collapse of everything our mother spent 70 years preserving." The threat of Anne's resignation was a death blow. The departure of the late queen's most trusted, tireless daughter would signal to the nation and the global commonwealth that the monarchy was fractured beyond repair. Charles realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that he had reached the end of all compromises. There was no third option, no quiet middle ground where private happiness and sovereign duty could peacefully coexist. Anne then signaled toward the adjacent door, where senior constitutional legal advisors had been waiting in absolute secrecy. The lawyers presented the final constitutional memorandum, a cold, surgical legal briefing that separated the sacred vows of holy matrimony from the public office of the crown. The law was uncompromising. Camilla would remain the king's wife in private life, but her ceremonial rank as queen consort, her official state duties, her access to confidential cabinet papers, her household staff, and her place inside succession councils were to be entirely stripped away through an absolute sovereign directive. Camilla stared at the documents, her face draining of all color as the full reality of her downfall materialized before her eyes. The ambition that had driven her for decades, the hard-won legitimacy she had bled to secure, was being systematically dismantled in a matter of minutes. She reached out with a shaking hand, her voice cracking as she pleaded one last time. "Charles, please, after everything we endured to get here." But the king did not look up. The triumph of duty over personal desire was complete. With agonizing slowness, Charles picked up the fountain pen, uncapped it, and pressed the nib to the cream parchment. As his signature marked the final line of the royal order, the balance of power inside the monarchy shifted forever. Hope collapsed into absolute, silent ruin for the fallen queen, while the cold, unyielding rule of justice reclaimed the crown. By dawn, the palace had transformed into a fortress of silent, ruthless efficiency. The execution of the sovereign directive was swift and unsparing. Across the royal estate, the physical machinery of power was systematically rewired before the first rays of sunlight touched the gray stone turrets of Buckingham Palace. Security codes were updated, keycards revoked, and household staff reassigned with quiet, terrifying precision. In the administrative corridors, courtiers who had once lined up to seek Camilla's favor turned their eyes away, executing a swift, instinctual realignment toward Prince William and Princess Anne. For the fallen queen, the morning brought not a violent exile, but something far more suffocating, a quiet, total erased presence. Her former private offices were locked and audited, her official correspondence schedules canceled, and her personal influence over state briefings wiped completely clean. She remained within the quiet sanctuary of her private apartments, stripped of the royal titles that had cost her half a lifetime to acquire, forced to witness the cold machinery of state move on without her. The psychological reality of her defeat was absolute. Camilla sat in her private sitting room, surrounded by the eerie silence of a court that had abandoned her overnight. The delicate porcelain, the gilded mirrors, and the historical portraits on the walls now felt less like emblems of royal status and more like the gilded bars of an elegant prison. There were no public protests in her defense, no loyal factions raising political battles on her behalf. The crown had simply closed its heavy doors and excluded her from its core. Her former royal patronages were systematically redistributed to Princess Anne and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, transferring the public face of the monarchy to those who held pristine dynastic legitimacy. In losing her title, Camilla had lost the singular anchor that justified decades of personal sacrifice, public condemnation, and intense hostility. She was left only with the bitter realization that inside the ancient house of Windsor, personal love is an ephemeral luxury, easily sacrificed on the altar of institutional survival. For King Charles, the aftermath brought no sensation of triumph or relief, only a heavy, permanent mantle of sorrow. Standing at his study window, overlooking the foggy palace gardens, the monarch looked noticeably aged, his shoulders weighed down by the terrifying cost of his own command. He had preserved the crown, protected the lineage, and secured his son's future reign, but he had done so by severing the emotional heart of his private world. In choosing duty over affection, he had fulfilled his solemn coronation oath, yet the victory felt like a tragic ruin. He understood now the dark, inescapable truth that his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and his royal ancestors had known before him. To wear the crown is to inhabit a realm of absolute loneliness. Every decision of state, every signature on a red box, every royal directive demands the total sacrifice of human warmth. His relationship with Camilla would endure in private whispers behind closed doors, but the public partnership that had defined his middle age was dead, buried under the unyielding weight of constitutional law. Meanwhile, Princess Anne and Prince William stepped into the newly ordered reality with solemn, unbending resolve. There were no celebrations within their ranks, no expressions of victory or vindication. They understood that saving the monarchy from internal decay had required an extraordinary, hazardous exercise of sovereign authority that exposed the fragile nature of royal power.
Prince William assumed his expanded constitutional duties with a newfound hardened maturity, knowing that the mantle of heir now rested entirely upon his shoulders, without the threat of shadow courts or competing agendas.
Princess Anne, ever the vigilant guardian of the dynasty, returned to her tireless rounds of state service, her presence a stern reminder to the entire household that the rules of the crown are absolute and non-negotiable. The palace had been purged, its hierarchy restored, and the line of succession insulated from ambition, but the scars left by the confrontation would remain embedded in the marble walls forever. Throughout history, the British crown has not survived through weakness, sentimentality, or soft compromise, but through a terrifying, fatalistic capacity to consume those who seek to bend it to their will. From the bloody feuds of the Plantagenets to the cold execution of royal favorites under the Tudors, the throne has always demanded absolute allegiance, mercilessly discarding any individual, no matter how beloved, who threatens the continuity of the realm. The royal decree of King Charles III serves as a chilling modern testament to this immutable law. Dynasties endure only when duty crushes desire, and the crown remains a cold, unyielding entity that belongs to history alone, indifferent to the fragile human hearts that break beneath its weight. If you enjoyed this deep dive into behind-the-scenes royal power shifts, please like this video and subscribe to the channel.